for joining us here, and also thank you for coming to Startup in Pakistan, taking the journey all the way from Seattle. With this, I think I'd love to begin by asking all the amazing questions that I've prepared for you. So before we talk about your role at Seattle and the amazing work that you're doing now, I'd love to give the audience an understanding of your background, right? So you are from Pakistan, from Lahore, but I'd love to ask you more about for the audience from where
Sure.
you are, what's your family like, what were your early experiences.
Sure. Thank you, Arzesh. So I actually grew up in Karachi and I did my early schooling from St. Michael's Convent High School, which some of you may be familiar with if you've been to Karachi. It's a very large school right, at Boat Basin in Clifton. And there was really no need, no desire from the family side to for me to pursue higher education outside Pakistan. We belong to a family business family where there's lots of enterprise work going on within Pakistan. The idea was, go to schools like all of your cousins, get a degree on the side so that you can find a good wife, and then just join the family business. And I have always had a temperament of trying to be as independent as possible. And when I was looking around in my high school at my other cousins and my extended family, I could see that although they had a very good financial stability and a family life, they were still very dependent on their elders. And so, for that one big reason, I decided to leave Karachi and pursue studies outside. The only way my parents would allow me to go outside Pakistan was they said, if you are going to study business or economics, something easy, they said, then we can just teach you here in Karachi. So I had to come up with something that would convince them that I could only study abroad. And so I came up with computer engineering. And so, I have to admit that my entry into the world of tech and the world of computer engineering was a bit of a accident
Okay.
because I wanted to leave. In terms of my other, family structure, I've got all of my family still back in Pakistan. I've got a brother and a sister in Lahore, and two sisters in Karachi. My wife is from Lahore, so now when I introduce myself and people ask me where you're from, I've sort of skipped the Karachi aspect of my life, and maybe that's why Arzesh, you're also thinking I'm from
Yeah,
Lahore.
that's why I was also confused because
Yeah,
both times I know that you came to Pakistan, you were in Lahore.
right. That's right. And so Lahore, personally speaking, I have just enjoyed my time in Lahore more than Karachi. I find the lifestyle in Lahore to be a lot more, relatively speaking, I should say, slow paced. And of course no shortage of opportunities to go for restaurants, which is a big activity for us when we go visit. And I visit Pakistan regularly. I saw you in Islamabad, Arzesh, which seems like many years ago, but it was only some months ago. But
Yeah,
I try to be in Pakistan 2 to 3 times a year, which is unusually high number, but my because my family is there, I feel like I need to see them every 3 to 4 months.
that's amazing. That's amazing. I think that worked out very well for us as well. And now that we got connected, so I'd love to share how we actually got connected. So, you posted this news about the Pakistan Tech Summit, and then out of all the 700 people, you also registered interest. And then I actually went through the whole list because I'm like so eager to see who are all these amazing people, and
Right.
then connected bunch of people, and then you replied, and we ended up you ended up flying all the way from Seattle to Islamabad for the Startup Brand conference. So number one, thank you for that. And I think it worked out well for us that you travel so often to Pakistan, because then maybe we can take more uh, leverage from your experiences and learn more from you now that you spend a lot of time coming back and forth, right?
And although
uh,
Arzish, I'm finding that because of COVID, virtual meetings and virtual connections has become even more common, and people are
yeah,
becoming even more comfortable. So maybe those are also new opportunities for us to use when we're connecting with others.
absolutely, absolutely. So you talked about, why you kind of went out from Pakistan, the whole motive, right? And you accidentally ended up in the computer engineering and tech space, right?
Right.
But after that, how did your early career shape up? What were like some of the first organizations that you worked with?
Right. So, Arzesh, if you had asked me back when I was in my fourth year university, that if I was going to be in North America for more than a couple of years after graduation, I would have said absolutely not. Because my full plan was get the education, maybe work a couple of years, and then, of course, come back to Pakistan and join the family business. um, and I thought, why not get experience in a field that is going to help me with that business that I was going to join? And so, of course, I didn't want to do engineering, hardcore engineering work. I applied to a bunch of companies, IBM and a few others, and Nortel Networks, which was a big deal. It was like the Amazon of those days. It had a large global footprint. It paid well. It had offices everywhere, and they offered me to work in their North Carolina office in their product management division. And so for me, that was not engineering, very close to the sales people, the marketing people. It was going to take me to another part of North America. And so I was very lucky enough to get the offer. Many people, of course, apply to these American opportunities that get posted in Canada. I was lucky enough to be selected, and so I joined Nortel, and that was uh, uh, something immediately happened when I joined Nortel, which was the Nortel company on the stock market crashed. All of a sudden, investors found out that there was a lot of mismanagement happening. So, literally within 3 months joining Nortel, the world had changed around me. And I was very seriously thinking to maybe find another job and move back to Canada. But that was a big blessing in disguise because as people were getting laid off around me, although I was hired to do a very niche business, which was one telecom product and do some product management around it, my responsibilities just kept on growing as people around me kept on disappearing. So those couple of years that I was with Nortel, I got to play in areas in finance, in sales cycles, in RFPs of all sorts that otherwise I would have never been able to get exposed to in such a short period. And so I did that, and then I started getting hooked on living independently, especially when you start making money and you have nobody on top of you to control how you're spending that money. So I said to myself, maybe I should stay for another couple of years. And I
Right.
convinced my parents. And this time I moved to Canada because I wanted to get my Canadian citizenship. And and so that's how I left Nortel. And then back in Canada, I joined Canadian Pacific Railway, which is one of the largest railway transportation company. It's definitely not a company that people go to university and say, "I wish my kid is going to work for CP Rail," because it's not a very, sexy industry. It's not a very fast-moving business. But I have found in my career that sometimes the best opportunities you find in those companies that maybe are not on everybody's radar. And so
Yeah.
with CP Rail, I was able to find, all sorts of opportunities to be part of strategic planning, part of business development. For people who are maybe curious, what CP Rail does is they have a fleet of rail cars across North America, Mexico, and they transport goods. And my job coming into the company was they gave me a portfolio of about $350 million worth of rail car assets. And my job was to make the most use of that asset. How do we position them across the various geographies? How much should we charge for them? What pricing models should we create? And as you can appreciate, that none of what I was doing at CP Rail had anything to do with engineering. But I found that as soon as you said to somebody that I'm a computer engineer, they made a default assumption that you're smart, which I think is very untrue because not all computer engineers are smart. But it opened a few doors for me, is what I'm trying to say. So I can keep going on and on, but I can pause there, Arzesh, for any follow up.
So with CP Rail, I think it was your first experience working in the public sector, right?
CP Rail is a private sector company. It's a multi-billion-dollar private sector firm. Yeah.
Wow, it sounds like a public company because
Yeah, because
anything.
because I think we are used to Pakistan Railways. It's
But you talked about kind of opportunity in disguise, right? When a lot of people were getting fired, and very similar to right now, you were seeing
hmm,
opportunities in these situations, right? Which is amazing, right? And I can totally relate to independence in an early age when you start earning, because not because of myself, because I live with my family and I love that, but because a lot of my friends are currently going through that stage, and I think very few of them end up finding the right path, right? So you can get lost, and
and
all
then
that.
one thing, Arzesh, that maybe I should share, which is very personal, that I don't think I've shared with many folks, is when I first moved to university. I was 18, and I went to A levels in Pakistan. I did my A levels from Lyceum in Karachi, Lyceum School. I got very good grades. I thought I knew English very well. I read books. And then I found out in my first term, first few months, that I was struggling in a huge way to communicate with people verbally. And there was a major confidence issue that I was finding. And throughout my 4 years, I was living under that lack of confidence that maybe my progress in university and if I were to work somewhere is going to be hindered because I cannot speak fluent English. And when I went to Nortel, I had to face that head on because, of course, there was no Urdu speaking people around me. And I remember that when I was having some of my low days in my early time at Nortel, there were a few people that weren't my official mentors, but I got attracted to them because they were extremely positive about what the future is going to hold, like generally speaking. And so, one lesson I've learned through that experience is that when you attach yourself to people who are very positive in their mindset, that rubs on to you. And uh, one of the reasons why I was able to get my confidence back is because of those informal mentoring that I received.
Yeah. So I think that's why I am doing this interview and kind of attaching myself to people like you, so I can
Mm,
also get rubbed on, like, so that some positivity. And so you started with Nortel and then went to CP Rail. How did that journey transition from working with this different and somewhat diverse role to becoming the CIO of Ottawa, right? Which
right.
you did for like 8 years.
Right. So at CP Rail, what I found, Arzesh, was that many people who had been with the company for many years. And I said to myself that I don't want to be one of those people who dedicate their entire life to just one employer. And as much as I was having a great time in CP Rail, my skills were very transferable that I brought from Nortel. I just kept on getting exposed to even more financial modeling, even more strategic planning. And I wanted to leave CP Rail, but they wouldn't let me. And they said, Saad, if you stay with us for a couple of more years, then we'll put you on a fast track. Maybe then you'll decide that this is a company you want to stay for long. And the compromise that I had to make was that I had to move from Toronto, where I was based at, to Calgary, where the head office of CP Rail is. And they put me right beside the top executives at CP Rail, where I was doing a lot of strategic planning for the company. And once again, after a little while, I found myself to be a little bit bored of the industry. And I quit my job and took a big risk in moving back to overseas. I said to myself, maybe now the time is right for me to move back to Pakistan. So I moved to Pakistan. One of my uncle owns a stock brokerage company, and so my first week was spent in Karachi doing day trading, which is a passion of mine still up until today. I just lost money yesterday. And but then I quickly found out that I needed to get back into a professional domain, sort of get my feet wet, and so I was able to join Citibank fairly quickly. And Citibank was at that time making planning to make an acquisition of Prime Bank, which used to be a bank no more, I think. And
Yeah.
so they hired me as part of a small team they were assembling who was going to work in with their Dublin office, where Citibank Europe is based. And I was part of that team to do a lot of risk assessment, lots of risk analysis on what this acquisition would mean for Citibank. And there was, some travel involved. And then I thought I was having fun. I thought that I was now going to be able to work for a company like Citibank and maybe just stay in Pakistan and maybe Dubai or Europe, someplace close to Pakistan at least. And then maybe 3 months in my I was visiting Pakistan, and 3 months in that year, there was a kidnapping attempt on me. And that kidnapping attempt on me was made me realize that I was no longer that same Saad that left Pakistan, because you know before I left Pakistan, burning tires, kidnapping, robberies at home, car snatching, all of that was very natural in Karachi growing up. So I decided that as a with a young family now, it maybe I wanted to move back again. And so I left Citibank again, a very, very good opportunity, different industry, very fast paced, extremely competitive. I was definitely not the smartest person in the room there, because they attracted some really high profile caliber people. And I moved back to Canada, and I was able to find a job right away with a company called Flextronics. And maybe I'll pause here if
Okay.
you had any follow up, Prazesh.
No, no, absolutely.
Good, keep
Please, please.
going.
I'm really.
And so, Flextronics, for those of you who might be wondering, it's a $50 billion company based out of Singapore that nobody probably has heard of, because they are the people behind the scenes who manufacture electronics products. So, Toshiba, HP, Apple, Microsoft devices. And they hired me in Canada, what I thought was a some sort of a market research opportunity where they wanted me to grow their business in Canada. Turns out that they had 5,000 employees in Canada. Their manufacturing business in Canada was slowing down. It wasn't cost competitive, and they hired me to actually shut down that business. My mandate was to lay off 5,000 people, and by a certain date, shut down the facilities at Flextronics. And
Wow.
that was, and again, it wasn't just me. I was part of a team. But as you can appreciate, that my career from job to job was progressing in a different direction, a direction that I had really not planned. I had was not as purposeful. Although I wanted to experience as many industries, I never realized that I was now going to be restructuring and being part of such a big reduction exercise. And so when that reduction, I was there with Flextronics for about a year. And as I was ending my assignment, they offered me to move to another part of Flextronics outside Canada, because they were not going to have any local presence. And I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to stay in Canada. And one of the person that got laid off was from Flextronics, become a top executive with the government in Calgary. And
Oh,
so he convinced me that, Saad, why don't you come and join me and lead the oil and gas business development for Alberta, internationally. Alberta has the second highest oil reserves in the world after Saudi Arabia.
wow.
The reason why we don't hear about Alberta and Calgary so much is because all of their oil production goes to the US. So it's a captive market that they have. So that's why Pakistan or Asia never buys oil from Canada. So they gave me this portfolio of bringing investments from outside Canada into Canada for oil and gas, and connecting local companies especially the small businesses, the new entrepreneurs in the energy sector in Canada, connect them to overseas opportunities. So I remember that my first 3 years was busy taking companies from Canada to, let's say, Abu Dhabi or
Yeah.
China or South America, and connecting, and then also hosting these folks from all over the world when they came in. And I again developed a skill of matching business to business, which at that time I had no idea was going to be a skill set that I would use many times over. But that is what I did for the next 3 years with Calgary Economic Development, international business development for the energy sector. And that work was going really well as well. And then the government, the Ottawa government, found out about my work. They invited me to come and take a look at some opportunities in Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada. And then I moved to the city of Ottawa. So city of Ottawa would be my first government job. uh, that was year 2010.
So Calgary is still not a government organization.
No, it wasn't a typical government job. It was funded by the private sector. It was a very small organization, maybe 40 people,
Oh,
but it was, and it had public sector funding as well. But it was maybe it was considered to be more like a hands of agency of public and private um, sector companies. And so at the city of Ottawa, my portfolio was to be director of economic development and innovation. Ottawa was very well known at that time for um, both tech sector, but because the tech sector had sort of cooled down at that time, people just considered federal government as sort of the main employer. So my job was to diversify the economy. And so in that time, I did a bunch of things with my team. I created a new agency called Invest Ottawa, similar kind of agency that I used to work for back in Calgary. I created that in Ottawa. We did a lot of film business development work. I did lots of trade missions to China. I went to India as well with a sizable trade delegation. And again, my next 5 years in Ottawa were all about uh, creating a good tech ecosystem, because that was really the diversification strategy there. So we were working with companies from photonics, from clean tech, telecom, software application companies. And there was a lot of collaboration with the universities and colleges in the Ottawa market that I used to be leading. And maybe one of the highlights that I should mention is we created. We had always talked about having an innovation center in Ottawa, which would be like an incubation center.
yeah.
So I started that from scratch, created a public-private partnership of about $45 million to create a very large incubation center right in the middle of downtown Ottawa, which anybody who visits can go to. It's called Innovation Center at Bayview Yards. And that became a melting pot of small tech startups working with large established tech companies and the public sector. So that was a big deal over there at that time. And of course, I didn't mention tourism. I was also leading tourism for the city of Ottawa. Once again, as you can imagine, they did not teach me that in my computer engineering, but something I found is that most jobs I found are not rocket science. Unless you are actually a rocket scientist, most of the jobs are relatively simple. I think we make them complicated with some acronyms and jargon. um, but I think most people can probably do most jobs fairly well. So just being open to new opportunities, that type of mindset has allowed me to move from one very different thing to another very different area.
Yeah, and it's amazing how each job experience has been so different for you from the last experience. And even then, you've done an amazing job and then ended up leaving it for something that is again entirely different.
Right. And I keep justifying to myself, why am I still in outside Pakistan? Because When I call my family, they're having such a great time, especially nowadays when I call them on Zoom. So I keep justifying myself that I better keep having a better time in my professional life here. Otherwise, I should also go back to Pakistan. So I think maybe there's a motivation there to keep proving to myself that this is worth it. Living in Canada or the US is worth it. Um, my job in economic development was going well, but I was getting bored of it, was deciding to leave the city back for the private sector, which I've always wanted to do. And the mayor of Ottawa said that we have had just a revolving door at the leadership level for the technology area of the city. We have hired 8 CIOs in the last 10 years, and none of them has
Wow.
been able to turn things around. So we know that you don't have a operational tech background, but could you come in and repair some relationships and do some people management work? So they gave me this portfolio of running the operations of the IT operations for this organization, which is also quite large, 15, 20,000 people. And um, I was able to use all of my restructuring and financial modeling experience and business process improvement experiences that I brought in from the past. Was able to restructure the entire organization. Was able to, take the bureaucracy as much as possible out of a IT department, which had made the department paralyzed. Departments, the other clients of IT were not trusting IT. So there was a lot of trust issues that had to be mitigated, process improvement that I had to do, lots of new technology that had to be introduced because we were operating on legacy uh, tools a lot. And I did that. And again, the speed at which we were able to make progress for the city was so noticeable um, that we got a lot of kudos. The team got a lot of kudos, and because of the work that I had been doing in Ottawa in my capacity, when there was a search that was going on in Seattle, of all places, they had heard about the work that I was doing and they gave me a call. Uh, I would have never applied to that job. I never wanted to move to the US myself. And so I again came here to Seattle, met with a bunch of people, including the mayor, and was convinced that this was going to be a much bigger challenge than I have ever taken, perhaps. And especially in a city like Seattle, which is so vibrant and known in the world for its innovation, I just could not turn that offer down. So I made that switch back in January of last year, and it's been 14 months since then.
Wow, no, that's amazing. And before I shed more light on your role at Seattle, I wanted to talk about one of the specific projects that you did while with your role in Ottawa, which is the Ottawa Innovation Pilot Program.
Right.
Right? So maybe we can talk a little bit about what you did there, and then
Sure.
uh,
One
yeah.
of the things I was finding working in economic development and then as a CIO there is that there was a lot of good technology solutions being produced by entrepreneurs, and these entrepreneurs
Okay.
they had a product which was ready for market, but they were all struggling with finding their first client and first decent client. And whenever they made a pitch to some organization to sell their product, the question would be is, can you tell us if there's anybody else using it? And if the answer was no, typically that
Yeah.
entrepreneur would struggle. And I think that's a very common picture for most entrepreneurs. So one thing that an idea that came about was, what if the city of Ottawa became a test bed for these entrepreneurs? And by test bed, we're not talking about just demonstrating and experimenting things, that we would give these folks an opportunity to commerce, to show that their product was ready for an enterprise level. So one great example that I share with my network is, there was a couple of PhD students from Iran who had just graduated from University of Ottawa, and they had come up with a way to measure the strength of concrete without actually drilling a hole. They had come up with a sensor It had various kinds of infrared rays, and all you had to do is just go to, let's say, a bridge and point your device, and it would tell you what the strength of the bridge is, whether it needed renovation or not. But they were
Wow.
struggling. And so we were able to give them an opportunity to test their product with the City of Ottawa's infrastructure. They did not charge us money. The program that I built was, we wouldn't pay you any money other than just enough money for you to recuperate the cost that's associated with that deployment for us. We would do it in a very controlled environment, and there would be no obligation that even if we liked what you were selling, that we would buy it from you. We would still do a competitive RFP process, and that was by design because we didn't want people to feel that there was a bias that was being created if somebody was in the innovation pilot program. And so, going back to this example, they were able to successfully demonstrate. We were amazed with what they had to do. We could save a lot of money and labor cost. And then that was exactly what they needed to make a multi-million dollar sale with the government of Dubai. And now, if
Wow.
you go to their website, it's called Geotech. If you go to their website, they have, I think, like 500 people. They're making probably millions of dollars. The founders have done really well for themselves. And so that is one example of many other examples we were able to create through the innovation pilot program.
I think that is such an amazing story to share because I can totally relate that a lot of similar startups, and I think it might be similar for other ecosystems, have the same challenge in Pakistan, right? Where
Mhm.
when you start something, especially in the enterprise market, right,
Right.
it's very hard to kind of get started. While at the same time, all of these, unfortunately, government contracts and tenders are going to like these big private corporations, often from outside Pakistan, while
Right.
we happen to be the third, fourth largest freelancing economy and have this huge tech pool, right? So I hope that will improve soon, and we'll learn from people like you. So now coming to your role at Seattle, right? So I
Mm.
read that it took a months long process, and uh, out of more than like 220 candidates, you were selected and invited for this role. You have a budget of around 277 million as of that article, and lead a staff of more than 680 employees, right? The mayor has said that you have a good balance of public-private experience to be the next CTO of Seattle, which you have been now for the past 14 months, right? As you said. So
Right.
for for the general public, or also for me, what does your role being the CTO of Seattle mean, and how has your journey been in the past 14 months?
Okay. So, just some context before I talk about my current role. The city of Seattle is a $6 billion enterprise, has multiple business lines, more than 30, from the police department to the fire department to public works to transportation, public health, real estate. And each of them, prior to 2016, had their own small IT department.
Okay.
Police had their own 50% IT shop, and so on and so forth. In 2016, a decision was made to take everybody who was somehow related to IT and make them part of one central department. And the thinking behind that was that if we do that, there's going to be synergy, we're going to save money, we're going to have better technology architecture, better cybersecurity. And of course, on paper, that made perfect sense. That's how most big organizations behave. What they found out was that the change, the outcomes they were looking for, did not materialize. I think when organizations go through restructuring, many of them, they discount how important it is to give attention to organizational change management. They make the assumption that people will just automatically understand why are we doing what we are doing, and because that type of thinking was not present at that time, people were brought in. They felt like that they were robbed out of a career that, people who were working in the police IT department, they had a real passion for the public safety work, and now not being part of that was a big blow to them. And so these folks came together. There was no thought given on how they were going to get integrated. And then 3 years passed, and all of those things that had been bothering them became came to the extent that the entire IT organization was completely paralyzed. There was no real work that was happening other than day-to-day business operations. For your audience, I would encourage them to watch a YouTube video. If you type in "there is no such thing as a dragon," there's a 1 minute cartoon clip that they can see where a kid finds a small fluffy dragon in his room and tells his parents. Parents don't believe it, and so throughout the day, as he is complaining to parents about the dragon keeps on growing, and at the end of the day, the dragon just takes over the house. And that was going on in IT, that there were so many small dragons in 2016 that had become a huge distraction by the time I joined. So that context is important. The um, mm, I had multiple mandates at that time. One of the mandate was just improve the morale of the workforce. Make sure that we're getting the best worth of the money we're investing in, and cybersecurity, and a whole bunch of things were thrown at me. So let me just share with you how I went about doing the restructuring.
Yeah.
One of the promises I made was that this was not going to be a made in Canada solution. I was going to really take the feedback of the people around me. So I went on a spree of having one on one meetings with my own staff and all of my stakeholders. And I had over 500 of them in the next 3 months. And many things became clear, that there was needing to be a restructuring change. We had to change our processes, our governance, our mandate had to be further clarified, cybersecurity had to be strengthened. And so in a few months, I was able to put in place a major restructuring of the organization. There were some layoffs associated with as well. And we were um, able to start to pivot to an organization whose now new mandate was to be a best in class. I encourage my staff to think about that, because we are not Kansas, because we are not Ottawa, we are not any other city. We are Seattle, which is known around the world for what we do in the private sector. There should be no shame in saying that we want to be a best in class IT department in the public sector around the world. And so that was the north star for us that we were going to go towards. And the restructuring sort of kickstarted that. And since then, Arzesh, we have been extremely busy on a whole number of fronts, from application modernization to engaging with the private sector here, to making major process improvement. We have made huge advancements in cybersecurity in the last 14 months. We are a lot more friendly to the cloud adoption strategy that we have put in place. And again, I can go on and on, but that journey has begun last year. We are still in the early parts of that. Pivoting a 700 plus department in a very bureaucratic, process oriented public sector organization is never going to be a simple task. And I think it will continue and go on even after I'm not here as the CTO. So that's the a quick summary of your question.
Absolutely. I think kind of transforming such a big organization, I think in private challenge is in the private sector is a challenge, but in the public sector, I think it might be a bigger challenge, because of like governments around the globe are not very different, and one of the most common things is that anything to do with government and the government itself are slow, right? And so change is also, I think, slow.
I think, if, as I mentioned to you, when I was having speaking trouble speaking English when I first moved out of
Uh,
Pakistan, I was having a confidence issue. I find that public sector in general suffers from a confidence issue. They feel that because they wear the public sector hat, that they cannot be good enough as the private sector. I can tell you that with many of my network that works in big companies, household name private sector companies, they have sometimes even worse challenges than what we face in the public sector. They, of course, have a lot of money to throw at it. And so I would encourage people who are working in the public sector or thinking about going in that direction that there are huge opportunities that we can do, especially in Pakistan. And I was very impressed with the conference that you and your team put together back in, I think it was October. Um, so much opportunity and so much enthusiasm from the young entrepreneurs there who want to make a difference in the public sector in Pakistan. Do as much of that as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. We were so honored to have your support and have you like fly all the way and join us as a speaker. Uh, Talking about, you mentioned that Seattle, when you were invited for this role, to consider this role, you thought about, Seattle being this innovation leader. So,
Right.
how does your department and your role now collaborate or work together with this very strong and thriving tech ecosystem that already exists in Seattle?
Right. So one thing we do it in a number of ways, but one big vehicle for us for private sector partnership is we invited the big brands that are based in Seattle. Tableau, Amazon, Microsoft, Zillow, which is a big real estate platform, Expedia, which is
Right.
also based in Seattle, and many others. And we gave them an offer. We said, we know that you have stuff that we could potentially buy from you. But if you
Yeah.
set that aside, could you partner with us and come around a table with your fellow competitors in the private sector and become an advisory board for the city on how can we leverage more technology? And so that offer was accepted by all of these firms, and they were able to give us, some of their key voices in their companies who could help us on giving us more strategic support. So that group is called Innovation Advisory Council (IAC), and it meets on a regular basis. I use this group as a sounding board as well as if we have ideas of doing certain pilots in certain different operations of the city. Let's say we want to do something around machine learning or data analytics or AI, and we just don't have the in-house experience of doing that, then this group becomes really instrumental in helping guide those efforts. So that has been one um, very tangible way to get the private sector involved. Now, from their perspective, they I would say, I have if they were on this call, they might admit that they feel the city of Seattle may not be moving as fast as they want us to move fast, and
Okay.
that is a real challenge. But despite that, we have been able to dip into that intellectual capacity that we have in Seattle in the private sector. The other thing, Arzish, that we are doing is that I would encourage not just people who are doing my type of roles, but even in any other sector, is that to have an international sounding board of people around you. So one of the things that I'm creating, it's not launched yet, is to have a group of people from various industries, but in my case, they have to have some technology bent, that they become my international group of advisors, that I would actually formally sign them up and they would start to advise me on some of the decisions that we have to make in Seattle. Our decisions are, long term. What type of infrastructure are we going to set up? What type of enterprise architecture do we want to build? Decisions around cybersecurity. And I feel that the more people you can bring into the tent in terms of collaboration, the better outcome you're going to produce. So that's another mechanism that is being put in place here in Seattle for us.
I think that's a fantastic way. And when I kind of started my first startup and learned entrepreneurship from an accelerator called Founder Institute, so they really put a lot of emphasis on mentorship and
Right.
especially forming an advisory board, right?
Right.
Because and you're totally right that no matter you're in public sector or private sector, having an advisory board of stakeholders of people who can contribute their thoughts and experiences and expertise is always helpful. And I don't see that yet happening a lot in the public sector here.
And
But as
one
you
of the
said,
reason, Arzesh,
yeah,
why it's not happening in Pakistan and actually in public sector in general around the world is that
yeah,
public sector feels that they're going to create a conflict of interest. What if that person
exactly.
who's on that advisory board tomorrow wants to sell us a product, and how will we handle that? And I think if done intelligently, that conflict of interest can easily be manageable. In my case, for example, one of the person that I want to recruit for my advisory board is my counterpart for the government of Singapore. And Singapore has become the leading sort of place in the world for digital transformation. So Estonia is another one. I want to get the CTO of Estonia to be on this board as well. In fact, if you wanted some help in getting one of those people maybe to be one of your speakers in the future, we could maybe make that work.
No,
But
we'd
for
love
the
to.
public sector in Pakistan, I would encourage people listening, if they have a hand in it, creating those advisory boards is going to pay dividends.
Oh, absolutely, and we'd love to connect with them as well. I think we met the city of Estonia when we were in Norway
Nice.
late last year. I think they had this big expo there as part of the
Yeah.
Oslo Innovation Week,
Yeah, he would
and
come as
definitely,
close to as possible being a celebrity in the boring world of CTOs.
or in the world of GovTech, right? Because
Yeah, that's
Estonia
right.
is considered like much ahead in kind of digitalizing their government processes
Right.
as compared to all of us, right? But
Right.
we'd love to connect, and we saw some amazing interest for a lot of our friends in the government, especially some friends in SECP and others, to kind of learn from Estonia, even travel there if possible, and connect with
Excellent.
them. So I think there's obviously a lot of these people now, people like Shabahat and Tanya
Right.
and all these others who are
Right.
trying to do and doing a lot of things, right? Especially in COVID, it's very evident they've built these platforms and tracking mechanisms. So we are headed to a good direction, and I think it is just a matter of time to reach kind of momentum on this
Mhm.
new change. So with this, yeah, do you have to add something?
I want to say one in the spirit of sharing some lessons learned from the from the public sector. Sorry, is one of the things that spooks the public sector when it comes to digital transformation. Is they feel that they have no choice but to deal with large companies, because
Right.
that has been the very traditional method of introducing any new technology in a large public sector corporation. And nothing wrong with large companies. Large companies are equally competent, but the experience of the public sector is that you enter into some transformation, let's say, of your payroll system, and it was going to be 50 million and it turns into 100 million. It was going to be 2 years and the project is still going on after 5 years. And that is such a familiar story in any public sector around the world. So my suggestion to those in Pakistan, but something that we definitely are doing in Seattle, is that we are starting small and thinking big. That we
Exactly.
find no hesitation to enter into a very small contract, sometimes with a small company, but with the full idea that we're going to make it scalable, versus doing a big purchase of $100 million item and then find that we're stuck with it after a few years. So there is just another change of mindset that people, if they have in Pakistan, then entrepreneurs that are part of your network will have a better chance to penetrate the public sector.
No, absolutely. That's amazing advice. And once we're going to produce the blog post from this fireside chat as well, I think a lot more people will read it over time.
Okay.
One of my questions moving forward, I think we are very close to closing time, but we'll hopefully wrap this up. So talking about 5G, I know that there's some states that started 5G in the US or something. But in one of these articles, you said that there's a lot to be gained by Seattle by being an early adopter of 5G.
Right.
So being a Pakistani, you very well connected with Pakistan as well. Uh, how do you see the impact of 5G on an economy like Seattle? But also, how do you see the impact of 5G especially in economies like Pakistan and
Got it.
India and Bangladesh, like emerging world.
Right. So many years ago, Time magazine did a cover story, and they said Mahathir Mohamad, Prime Minister of Malaysia,
Yeah,
excuse me, he was the Man of the Year type of an award, and they interviewed him, and I think that's available online. And they asked him, what is the secret? Why is Malaysia has been able to stand out amongst all of its other Asian countries to become the Asian tiger, as it was called?
yeah,
And he said the secret sauce for us has been is to just connect every inch of Malaysia with roads, with highways,
okay,
so that no matter where you are in Malaysia, you can, transport your goods over trucks, and take a car and go anywhere. If I use that same analogy, the highway of the future is going to be based on 5G. And so, if we are no longer going to move goods on trucks, if we are going to be moving them, via data packets, then
yeah,
5G becomes your lifeline. And so, just for that simple reason, just to create, the connectivity that the future enterprises are going to need, the infrastructure of 5G is going to become essential. Now, there's a myth about 5G is already happening in certain US states or in certain countries. I think I was in Dubai in December of last year, and there was a sign about, oh, welcome to 5G. And I think there's a lot of marketing gimmick right now happening around 5G. Spectrums have not been auctioned everywhere for 5G. The installations of these small cell has not really happened in most places. Phones are not widely available for 5G as well. So there is still a huge infrastructure investment that needs to go on in the world of 5G before we start seeing some of the commercial opportunities. And those commercial opportunities, we expect to see them in areas of economic development, in tourism, travel. Um, One of the test cases that is being talked about more and more is, just like you and I are having this fireside chat. I can see your face very clearly, and it's quite okay. But wouldn't it be better if I actually saw Arzesh and Arzesh saw me sitting across from each other across the table, and the only
yeah,
way I can find if Arzesh is not there is if I touched you,
yeah,
because you would be a hologram, and holographic use cases are going to also come into
yeah,
action because of 5G. So again, the opportunities are yet to be defined, uh, but there is a real need for the governments around the world to make it as easy as possible for that 5G infrastructure to actually come into their communities. And that is where you will have a first mover's advantage. I'm not familiar with the 5G work going on in Pakistan, but in the US, it is going full steam. Seattle also, is getting. I mean, we would love to fast track it as much as possible, but it is going. It's happening here as well. Um, and with 5G, with any new technology, come some challenges. There are some health concerns that people have. On WhatsApp, every now and then, somebody sends me a
yeah,
dead pigeon that, somebody installed a 5G antenna and all the pigeons are dying. And of course, that type of hype is going to continue around the concerns. But again, the governments have to take a step forward in coming up with the right policies and guidelines uh, when this infrastructure is being deployed.
No, absolutely. I think I totally agree. And just to share, I believe the Ministry of IT held kind of the first meeting of a 5G Pakistan planning
Hmm.
committee early last month.
Very
So they
nice.
are kind of uh, discussing this, and I hope they kind of take a lead with this, uh, rather than how they did with 3G. 3G was obviously late in Pakistan. So kind of I'm sorry that we've run so close to the closing time, but this is just a couple of my last questions.
Sure.
So it's hard to not address the elephant in the room, which happens to be all of us sitting at home. So how is your So how is Seattle responding to the work from home or all these
Right.
COVID-19 challenges, and how is your department facilitating the uh, change?
Right. The city of Seattle sits on a fault line, an earthquake fault line. And so there is, for the last many years, planning is been taking place. It's a very real thing for us for a big earthquake that is going to come to Seattle. They say it's only a matter of time. In my office, underneath my desk, I have a red bag that has been given to me. It has a torch. It has got all sorts of things that I would need when the big earthquake happens, which is expected to kill thousands of people. And because we have always been in that emergency mode when COVID happened, there were a lot of processes that we had talked about on paper that got activated as a city. And so that was good. What we never thought about we needed to do was that the entire commercial side of the city is also going to go silent. There is not just the city of Ottawa, every possible aspect of the city is going to be paralyzed. What we also were not uh, ready for, I would say day one ready, was the ability for 20,000 employees at the city to just go to their home computer or their office laptop in their homes and just start continuing to do their business as if they were in the office. So we had to, on a very urgent basis, put in place collaboration tools, make sure that our VPN infrastructure was going to handle the workload that we were going to create, and uh, all of that had to be done in a very short period of time, which we were able to do very successfully. And as I was sharing with you before this webinar started, that digital transformation is always going to owe COVID a big thank you, because COVID has really pushed people to start using technologies otherwise they would have never used before. The one thing I should mention is that one of the challenges we have been seeing is that cybersecurity has become a huge topic for us during COVID. There have been there has been a much higher level of frequency when it comes to cybersecurity, and how people are wanting to take advantage, given that we might be distracted. But we certainly are not, and we are very taking a very keeping a close eye on it, and we have all sorts of tools to handle cybersecurity as well. So the work for us is still remote right now, Arzesh. We don't expect to go to the office for at least a few weeks, if that. And so we are now getting used to this new business rhythm of working from home and conducting our business remotely.
That's fantastic. I think I'll just wrap up with my last question, because I'm sure you have to leave as well. So, given all the amazing and really diverse experiences that you've had all your life, and not just those diverse experiences, but working with organizations, either inside them or helping them expand, market, different kinds of organizations, startups, big corporations. What would be your advice for new entrepreneurs or founders who are just starting their journey?
New entrepreneurs who are just starting their journey, um, my one advice would be is to be as focused as possible. In my especially in my economic development days, I remember meeting with entrepreneurs who were so full of energy, and they had so many ideas and so many things they all wanted to do at the same time. Unfortunately, their energy might last for a little bit longer, but money runs away much faster. And so, if you're a new entrepreneur, you want to make sure that whatever the niche area that you are looking to get out at, you become as focused as possible, as early as possible. I would say the second thing would be is networking, and I think Rajesh, you are a role model when it comes to networking. But that is what often separates somebody who has a great idea from somebody who has maybe the second best idea but a lot of business opportunities, is the ability to network. My third advice would be is that network in a way so that you don't turn off people. I find that some entrepreneurs, they become a bit of a pest, and you don't want to get onto the do not disturb list of the person you're trying to get a hold of. So be smart about how you network. um, And my maybe one of the other ones would be um, is try to find as many times partnership opportunities with bigger companies. I found that entrepreneurs, they have a bit of a bias, almost like a love-hate relationship with big companies, and I would think that that works against them. You need to have some partnerships with some existing brand names that can fast track the ability for you to get your product to market. So those would be some high level advice.
There, that's some fantastic advice, especially I think about networking and not getting on the do not disturb list. We really kind of preach these values of helping others and giving first, right? Which
Mhm.
essentially means that if you're trying to build a relationship, have a give first approach, right? So even if
Right.
you want to buy something from someone, or you have
Very true.
to sell something, figure out what value you can create. It
Exactly.
might be just an introduction or just helping out. There are countless ways, and we're
You
just
got it.
happy to be one of the enablers of doing this.
You
With
got it.
this, I think we're 3 minutes over time, so I'll just wrap this up with thank you to the amazing audience who joined us, but also to you, not just for joining us for this webinar, but also flying all the way to Pakistan and taking out all the time for this webinar, but also doing a fantastic job. I think being a Pakistani, it really makes me feel proud that there are people like you who've made this tremendous journey of doing so many fantastic things, and now leading such amazing initiatives, and it is super inspirational for me and a lot of people in this ecosystem who are starting out or trying to do something. So thank you so much for joining.
Thanks again, Rajesh, for the opportunity, and good luck to everyone. Stay safe.
Absolutely. Allah
Khuda
Hafiz.
Hafiz. Allah Hafiz.